let me just tell you kind of the lead up, what happened in the lead up of the Ukraine war. The Ukraine war, we were lied to because we're told, oh yeah, this evil Putin trying to take over Europe, and this is his first step to reestablishing the Soviet Empire. And that, it's the same comic
And is that a lie?
Yeah, it's the same comic book description we were given of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, which we were just lied into a war. And yeah, it was a slam dunk that he had weapons of mass destruction. Of course he didn't, and he had nothing to do with terrorism. And he was running the most progressive nation in the Mideast. It was a secularized nation. It wasn't a theocracy. He wouldn't let people,
And I will agree that maybe in hindsight that was a mistake. But
all right,
Putin,
then let me tell you what happened. The real story behind what happened in Ukraine. And let me go back to 1992, because 1992 the walls come down, the Berlin Wall comes down, and Gorbachev does something very courageous. He goes to Tony Blair and George Bush, and he says, I'm going to allow you to do something that nobody in their right mind would do, which is I'm going to remove 450,000 Russian troops from East Germany, and I'm going to allow you to unify East Germany under NATO, which is a hostile army. But I want one commitment from you. You will never move NATO further to the east. James Baker, who was then Secretary of State, famously said to him, we will not move NATO 1 inch to the east. So then 5 years later, 1997, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the first of the neocons, comes along and proposes, let's move NATO to right up to the Russian borders. We're into 15 nations, okay? And at that time, the most important diplomats in American history at that time were George Kennan, who was the architect of the containment policy during the Cold War. He said, if you do that, you're going to force, this is crazy, it's insane. Russia just lost the Cold War. We should be giving them a Marshall Plan and integrating them into the civilized society, the Western society. Don't make them an enemy. Don't treat them like they're still an enemy. This is going to force a violent military response from Russia if you do that. Bill Pierce, who was then the Secretary of Defense, threatened Clinton that he would resign if they went ahead with this plan because it was so reckless. And Bill Pierce is now the head of the CIA. Bill Perry, who was the U.S. ambassador to Russia at the time, said the same thing. Why are you doing this? This is crazy. So between now and then, we moved NATO into 14 countries. Why do we move NATO in? Because when you move them into a new country, they have to sign a contract that conforms all their weapons purchases to NATO specifications, which means you have to buy the weapons from Northrop Grumman, from these big U.S. military contractors who profit from war. So we move it there. In the meantime, we walk away unilaterally from 2 nuclear weapons treaties with Russia. Russia wants those treaties. They're intermediate range missile systems which destabilize Europe when we remove our agreement not to fire missiles on Russia. And we put Aegis missile systems, which are nuclear capable, in Romania and Poland.
But the broad story, listen, you know the details, and these details, and I'm not taking a side on this, but if there was any, which a lot of people aren't really advocates of, but Trump, if anything, kind of, and whether he was a puppet or not, whatever you believe, he kind of normalized the Russian relationship, kind of, right, by becoming somewhat of a friend of Putin's. So between that time and the time that Putin, there was no NATO movement between the time after the Trump administration.
Yeah, well, what we did is then we overthrew the government of Ukraine.
So no, he came into Ukraine before.
We overthrew the government in 2014. USAID, which has spent $5 billion, which is a front for the CIA, which everybody acknowledges, went in there and started a revolution called the Maidan Rebellion, where there was these protests and ended with the overthrow of the elected government of Ukraine that wanted to keep Ukraine neutral. Yanukovych wanted to keep NATO neutral. We wanted a pro-U.S. government. So we went in there in 2014, overthrew their government, and placed a government. And by the way, a month before the overthrow, we now have tapes that you can go on the internet and listen to. Victoria Nuland, who's the head of the neocons now, the deputy director of the State Department, choosing the new Ukrainian cabinet that will be put in place after the coup that was still a month away. So she knew the coup was coming a month in advance.
But who is she to us?
She's us. She's the head of the State Department. She's now, number 3 in the State Department. But she's been in the State Department. She's one of the, she runs the neocon program, which is, continual wars. So we then pick a new government. The new government comes in, immediately begins attacking the people of Donbas and Lugansk, who are Russian-speaking ethnic Russians. They banned the Russian language, there was 2 languages that were 2 official languages. Ukraine, they banned that. Violence immediately erupts, and they kill 14. There's a civil war. This war started in 2014. There's 14,000 ethnic Russians are killed. And Putin kept saying, you're killing our people. He's trying to get a peace agreement. They finally work out a peace agreement called the Minsk Accords. Germany signs onto it, France signs onto it, England signs onto it, and Russia sign onto it. Zelensky runs in 2019 as president. He has one platform issue. He's a comedian and an actor, which I'm not.
Is there anything wrong with that?
Oh, my wife is one of those.
Okay, all right.
So, but he never had any political experience.
Right.
But he wins with 70% of the vote. Why? Because he runs on a peace platform. I'm going to sign the Minsk Accords. As soon as he gets in there, Victoria Nuland and the ultra nationalists, which is a nice way of describing the people who run that government now, tell him that he can't do it. He can't sign it. So he pivots, and then Putin then says, okay, Putin is now faced with this problem. The United States government is now running the government of Ukraine. And he is frightened to death that the U.S. Navy is going to go into Vladivostok, which is, the southern port. It's been the Russian port. It's the only warm water port Russia has for 347 years. So he then goes right into Ukraine into Crimea, and takes Crimea without firing a shot. Doesn't kill a single person, because the people of Crimea are ethnic Russian and want him back, want him in there. Donbas and Lugansk then votes 90 to 10 to join Russia. Putin says, no, I don't want you. I want Ukraine to be a functioning state. But let's sign the Minsk Accords. And they won't sign it. So then he sends in 40,000 troops. I'm almost done with this. Okay. He sends in 40,000 troops. That is not somebody who wants to conquer Ukraine. It's a nation of 44 million people. All he wanted was us back at the negotiating table. Zelensky, we will not help Zelensky negotiate. So he goes to Israel and gets Naftali Bennett and Erdogan in Turkey to sponsor negotiations, and they go and they work out a peace agreement. And Putin, they sign it in April of 2022. Putin is withdrawing his troops according to this peace agreement, already starts withdrawing them. Biden sends over Tony Blair and tells Zelensky to rip up the peace agreement. Now, how do we know this? Because all of the negotiators are now talking, including Naftali Bennett, and you can look it up when you're on the internet. You say you spend a lot of time.
I do.
Look at his speech where he tells you what happened. The lead Ukrainian negotiator this week came clean and said, yeah, that's what happened. Of course, Russia's been invaded 3 times through Ukraine. The last time.
So is Russia the good guy in your mind?
No, Russia, it was illegal what Russia did. We have to understand that they don't want this war. We want it.
Let me